is not here, so I'm going to call the budget committee meeting to order, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Moore to go over the budget with us. So we're calling the meeting to order, and the first thing I need is for someone to make a motion to approve the minutes of the November 25th, 2019 committee meeting. Long time ago. Supervisor McDevitt, seconded by. I'll speak at once.
I mean, I can. I don't even remember if I was on it last year. I'll make a second.
All right, no, but she wasn't on it. Okay, so we need someone who's on the budget committee to second the motion to approve the minutes of the November meeting.
No, I'm not.
I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Stroud will second that. All right, any additions or corrections? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Did I hear everybody? Opposed? We're assuming they're carried. All right, with that, the action agenda is a review of the budget, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Good morning. The tentative budget is not yet filed. That'll happen at some point next week, and we will have another budget committee meeting to officially review the tentative budget and do any recommendations that this committee or other supervisors may have for amendments to the budget. But we did want to, at some point before we actually file this thing, we did want to give an update to board members and department heads and the general public as to where we think this is headed. Supervisor Garrity can't be with us this morning, otherwise this would have been his presentation. He had a situation in his family that he had to attend to, so we wish him and his family all the best. I would like to thank, first of all, the department heads for giving us a lot to work with here. This was a really tough budget, but we started from a really good place. That's due to hard work from the department heads. Thanks to Tammy DiLorenzo, Christy Miller, and Rob Lynch for all the work that they do throughout the budget review process. Also, thanks to the supervisors that are involved in that process. All of the committee chairs are always there for their departments. In addition, we had participation from supervisors in areas where they did not chair committees. I particularly want to thank Supervisor Jack Diamond for, I believe he came to just about every single review session. And he's got a lot of great experience doing budgets in the city of Glens Falls. So we're always happy to have his perspective as we sit around the table and discuss these things. First, let me touch on where you'll find the changes that Supervisor Garrity is proposing to department head requests at this point. Those are all in your packet. Those are the attachments that are on there. There are 4 separate attachments. The first one in sequence in your packet are the official, the budget officer recommendations as to revenue accounts and expense accounts that are within the budget. This is a document that you see each year. And these are the changes that Kevin is contemplating. The expense changes total up to a reduction of $3.8 million from the department head requests, which is fairly significant. A lot of that is in DPW, and I'll explain that down the line. And $510,000 revenue increases for the revenues. The revenues you'll see in the packet are before the expenses. Revenue codes are 4 digits and expense codes are 3. I'll take questions at the end on any one of those if we're here all day. Whatever detailed questions you have, I think I've got answers to why those are on Kevin's sheet. The second item in there in your attachments is the personnel requests spreadsheet, which you are used to seeing. You see that each year. All of these items were worked on with the department heads. A lot of them, if not all of them, started as recommendations from the department heads as to changes that they would like to see in their departments. The expense reduction associated with these is $160,000, 160. I did note in the column on the end what the revenue adjustments are because some of these carry revenue with them. We calculated in the third attachment what that revenue change will be. The third attachment also puts in there ministerial changes that we do. When we get an update on health insurance premiums, for instance, we'll adjust those accounts. When we get an update from the state of New York on retirement projections, we'll adjust those accounts. The retirement piece caused us to have to add a lot to the initial appropriation in the department head column. So that's why that revenue adjustment sheet, your third attachment, that's going to total out to an increase in revenue of $123,000. So that's what that says is the $160,000 that we cut in the personnel requests, plus additional reductions that are associated with health insurance. At the end of the day, those cuts there were more expense additions due to the state's retirement projections. So that's why instead of it being a revenue cut, it's a revenue increase. And the fourth attachment is the adjustments that we made to the property and casualty insurance. This is our first year with a new combination of broker and insurance companies. The broker is Arthur J. Gallagher. And we asked Arthur J. Gallagher back when we were first working on the budget in the summertime to give us an estimate for what the insurance costs were going to be for 2021. The current expense that we pay for premiums for property and casualty insurance for 2020 is $752,000. Arthur J. Gallagher initially projected a 17% increase to $877,000. That's based on market conditions. The market is hardening, as they say in the industry. But we did a loss run review with Arthur J. Gallagher. We gave it a couple more months to see where the market went, had them reassess that estimate. And the revised estimate is down from $877,000 to $796,000. So that's $796,000. That's what's reflected in the fourth attachment. That details where the savings is that we were able to take out of the budget. And we also took out the associated revenues when we had reimbursable expense. That represents a 6% increase from 2020 insurance costs. I just want to back up to when we made this decision. The county had been for about 20 years. We had been with Nymir, and we put this out to bid last year, wondering whether we could get a better deal. We got a significantly better deal with Arthur J. Gallagher. In 2019, with Nymir being our insurance company, we were paying $870,000. From that $870,000, Arthur J. Gallagher reduced it by $120,000 to $752,000. And as I just said, the budget for 2021 is $796,000. So we're still paying less than we paid in 2019. So when you talk about the big changes we can make around here to bend the cost curve, this is an example of it. It was definitely a good move that this board RFP'd for the insurance and that we're with this new broker carrier combination. So those are the details. Again, we can get into if anybody has questions on anything specific that's in there. I did want to describe in general terms what we wanted to accomplish with these changes, as well as what we wanted to accomplish with the department head requests themselves for this year. And our general philosophy was to stay flat wherever possible, certainly to reduce wherever possible, but at least to stay flat. And we wanted to incorporate lessons that we learned during COVID this year. And a good example of that would be remote work. Remote work has resulted in an ability, we believe, to decrease overtime because we're not as rigid as we were. We've discovered how we can still get the job done without necessarily being here and punching a clock. As a result of that, we were able to cut overtime for next year by about $25,000 across a number of departments. Those numbers are all included in that personnel adjustment spreadsheet, so you can total it up and see how we got to the $25,000. And it's a lot of administrative departments. Travel budgets, they're also down. That's due in part to departments seeking out more online training this year because they couldn't go anywhere. We had a $4.2 million deficit reduction program this year. Some of that is carried forward into next year as departments lived with these reductions. You know, you have a way of figuring out efficiencies that you didn't necessarily see before. So we didn't carry over all of that 4.2 million, but we were able to carry over a good part of it, and that's reflected in the initial department head requests. We also had all the departments do an analysis of underperformance within their departments, as well as how they might be able to restructure units and restructure service delivery in a manner that doesn't impact clients, but maybe saves a little bit of money. Office for the Aging is one of the departments that did the most extensive work in that regard. So you'll see some of those changes reflected in this budget as well. Going down to positions, the sum total, there's a lot on that personnel spreadsheet that represents changes with existing positions, but the sum total of additions and deletions, we're proposing to eliminate 4 full-time positions and 2 part-time positions. And we would pick up 1 full-time position and 2 part-time positions. So that's a net decrease in county positions as a result, again, of that analysis that the departments did as to where they could make do with less. In terms of salaries, there's no cost of living adjustment in this budget. That's because, with the exception of it's somewhere between 4 and 6 individuals in the sheriff's department. Those individuals are covered by collective bargaining agreements with their unions. There are 2 supervisory unions. We have 7 unions in the county, and one of them is the supervisory for the PBA. The other is the supervisory for the jail. So those lieutenants already had a negotiated collective bargaining increase. That increase for next year is 2.65%. But with the exception of that handful of individuals, there is no cost of living adjustment. All of the unions you have CSEA and the PBA that have been out of contract since the end of last year. And the remaining 3 unions are going to be out of contract as of the end of this year. We also did not put in a cost of living adjustment for non-unionized people. Those would be managers and confidential employees primarily. Health insurance, we kept the premium equivalents flat to the 2000 level. Number one, as I said, no cost of living adjustments, and nobody's take home is going to go up. By virtue of keeping the premium equivalents flat, nobody's take home goes down either because health insurance got more expensive. We do have, due to good management in the treasurer's office, we have a healthy reserve for health insurance, and now's the time to use it judiciously. We're not looking by any means to burn through it, but if this is an example of a year where we can't afford to keep the premium equivalent flat. So that's what we're doing. In addition, the Humana, which we do for retirees that are Medicare eligible, it's a Medicare Advantage program. The Humana, the premium equivalent went down 20% from this year to next year. That has to do with a COVID bonus that they give. I'm not using the correct terminology there, but I could get more information on that for anybody who wants it. But that'll be a one-time thing. But we definitely could use the savings for next year. Dental and vision insurance; those are also both flat to the current year. Property and casualty insurance, I already mentioned, that's still lower than the 2019, and it represents a 6% increase over the 2020. In terms of reserve appropriations, we appropriate into the 2021 budget the same amount as we typically do for vehicles. That's $392,000, and the same amount we typically do for the computer reserve. That's $154,000. What we do not have in the tentative budget are the appropriations for some of the other reserves that we put in this year, because we ended up liquidating a good part of that. That included SUNY operating. It included an appropriation for the capital improvement program. It included, I think, $30,000 for countryside buildings and another $30,000 for county buildings. And it included smaller amounts, $15,000 each for retirement payouts and for uninsured losses. So that represents $330,000 that was in this year's budget that we are not proposing to put into next year's budget. Take a break on that and see where county finances come out of the pandemic. The contingency appropriation for next year is slated in for the same amount as this year. That's $275,000. We don't have anything in the contingency for unsettled contracts. We're going to have some tough negotiations next year. That's just the reality. For outside organizations, we do not have any increases budgeted for any outside organizations. In fact, we expected all of them to stay flat to the 2020 level, and that's what they all did. But what do I mean by outside organizations? We try to treat all of these the same. They're the Glens Falls recreation programs, which include Coles Woods, Eastfield, and Crandall Park. They're the Soil and Water Conservation District, the EDC and the LDC, Cornell Cooperative Extension, 4-H Camp, the Aquatic Invasive Species Program, which is $250,000, the APA Local Government Review Board, the Lake Champlain Lake George Regional Planning Board, the Southern Adirondack Library Council, the Adirondack North Country Association, the Warren County Historical Society, and Lakes to Locks Passage Incorporated. Those are all the entities that, again, are flat in this budget, no increases for any of those entities. Occupancy tax, the tourism department cut their budget by 14%. That represents $350,000. The CVB and Lake George Chamber and the Civic Center, next year is the second year of their 20% reduction that they each offered up for 2020 and 2021. So that reduction is in there. This budget right now, as written, does not include any dollars for the spending plan, the special distributions to the towns. This budget holds special events to $285,000. That, by comparison, last year, because you can't really use this year to compare. Last year, we spent $365,000 there, so $285,000. That's holding to the more traditional level for that particular budget. This budget for OCTAX and for the tourism department is also built off of assumptions that we would have $3 million and $3.5 million in revenue this year and $3.5 million in revenue next year. It looks like we'll be more on track for $4 million, maybe even do a little bit better, but let's conservatively say $4 million for 2020. And 3.5 million, I'd like to think we can do a lot better than that next year in 2021. So as we've stated in reference to the tourism budget and the OCTAX budget, that's what we got for now. They're based on very conservative revenues, and there'll be a time to assess whether we need to make adjustments to those early next year when we see how this year actually turns out. I would suggest that we take a look at that in January or February. Paving program. This is a major piece where we are able to save a lot of money for next year. And it's a difference from what we typically do. So I want to make sure everybody understands the logic of what we're proposing here. We have 250 miles of road in this county. And in order to make sure that, so what happened was at one point we got behind on the paving program. When you get behind on the paving program, the roads get more and more expensive each year that they're not attended to. Ideally, we would like to be in a position where we spend $3 to $3.5 million a year, and we keep up on what are essentially minor repairs so that we're not having to do overhauls on these roads. In order to get to that point where we have some budgeting stability, $3 to $3.5 million, we're going to have to spend $4.9 million every year for the next 5 years. We can't afford to do that next year. We don't want to fall further behind because, again, that program only gets more and more expensive to the extent that you can't meet the need. What we're proposing to do, and this would be a one-time thing, because the rates are so low, we're proposing to bond for the paving program for next year and the following year. And tentatively, what we would look to do is get 2 years worth of work done in 1 year, if we can. We contract out these paving programs now. We've seen efficiencies in that process. It's possible that if we put even more work into it, we'll get even more efficiency out of it. It's a good time to do infrastructure investments, good for local businesses to be able to do that. And the thought here is if we bond for these, what we would do is we would appropriate each year a cash amount so that we're not going to get hit with all of this in the out years. So this budget, we initially had a $4.9 million request for the paving program. We're proposing to reduce that to 3.25 million. That 3.25 million represents the cash that we think that we can afford to spend from 2021 to go towards this longer term view on paving. So we'll work this all out with bond counsel, work it out with the treasurer's office. We think that this is in the county's best interest because you got to think about paving as a 10-year proposition. That 10-year price is going to go up if we don't make the right investment now. We can't afford to make that full investment right now. The rates are really low, so let's take advantage of that, but not make it a habit. The same deal in the retaining wall project in Bolton, the road that leads out to Green Island. County's responsibility to fix that road. If we don't fix it and that wall washes out, we've got a sewage line now that's going to go into Lake George. That's not good. The price on this project right now, we already committed to the engineering in this year's budget. So the remaining price is estimated at $695,000. Same approach for this one. This is a one-time project that's an expensive project. It's all on the county unless we're able to get outside funding, which we continue to work on. So rates are low. Let's bond for that project as well. This budget represents a very large reduction in a transfer line, which would otherwise include the cash for this full project. Instead, we're including $150,000 in cash. Again, just to salt away for the debt service, so that the debt service isn't hitting us all at once. It's a way to spread the cost of this project out over a few years rather than take it all in 1 year and still get this important project done. If I could shift gears now into revenue, here's what we're working with in this budget. The major question mark is what's going to happen with state aid. Each department took their own view of what made sense to them budget-wise for state aid. I can go through what each of those individual departments did, but the highlights on this is that DSS budgeted next year for a 20% reduction in state aid in their administrative grant. That reflects about $800,000 in revenue that we think we'll get if state aid comes in the way it usually comes in, but we're not going to take it for granted. That $800,000 is not in this budget. We have the expenses there, and if we've trimmed back expenses in certain areas like PINs and OCFS placements where we just don't know whether we'll have any costs in those areas. We never know until we get them. So rather than, I think we took a total of $225,000 out of those two areas. And again, in best case scenario, we don't get that 20% cut. And if we need to spend money in those two areas that are what ifs, we can add the revenues and the expenses at the same time to fix those up. Also in Medicaid, we're assuming that the reduction in the additional federal aid ceases after the first quarter next year. So we're assuming 1 quarter of the enhanced FMAP, and then the rest of the year goes back to normal. Possibility that the rest of the year won't be normal, that we'll have some enhanced FMAP continuing. We just don't know that yet. We budgeted as if it's not going to continue. So there's potential for savings also in the Medicaid line that we could transfer out into PINs and OCFS if we need to. Also, probation reflected a 20% reduction in their base aid. That's a smaller amount. It only comes to about $40,000. And the sheriff reflected a 20% reduction in some of their state aid. There are other areas like mental health, where mental health's budget right now includes 100% state aid. Their approach to that will be if they don't have the aid, they're going to trim back the programs mid-year. They work with their providers and they're ready to handle that situation. They had to do something similar this year. So that's why we said, one size doesn't fit all for these departments as to how they want to handle the state aid issue. We listened to each one of them, and we're handling it the way they think is best for their departments. Sales tax. We are not budgeting any difference for the 2021 sales tax as it relates to 2020. So last year, when we were doing this year's budget, the most recent actuals that we had were the 2018 actuals. So when you look at the 2020 budget for sales tax, you're going to see a little over $55 million. That's what we collected in 2018. So we're carrying that 55,000 again into 2021. 2019, we did really well. I don't have the number right in my head, but it was significantly better than 55 million. We don't think that that's responsible to put that in for 2021 because we don't know how the recovery will be. So status quo on sales tax. Appropriated fund balance, status quo, $1 million. That's what we've been appropriating for the past couple of years. That's what we're proposing to appropriate again into 2021. That's reflective really of vacancy savings throughout. We have a personnel and fringe budget that's based on the proposition that everybody that's working when we made that budget works throughout the year. Never happens that way. Jackie went over all the separations about a half hour ago. So you always have a certain amount in salaries and fringe that you're not going to spend inherently just because of that. So that's why we put the $1 million in appropriated fund balance. It evens out those dollars that we know we're not going to spend so that we're not raising taxes to support them, if that makes sense. So here's where all of this gets to, and the major thing that everybody wants to know, which is the tax levy. This year's tax levy is $45,357,703. Under the state tax cap, we're allowed to increase that by $1.5 million. What we're proposing to do is to go from 45,357 to 46,147. What that's going to do is represent a reduction. It'll be a reduced tax rate for the county tax of 6.75 cents per thousand. The reason why it ends up representing a reduction is because of valuation. The valuation overall for the county grew 2 times more than the tax levy adjustment that we're proposing. Lake George and Bolton both did a reval. They both went from 90% equalization to 100% equalization. 3.5% was the amount that the value of in Warren County grew, the property value collectively. So that's why we end up with a reduction in the county tax rate. Depending on where you are, depending on what your equalization rate is and how much your property values grew, that number will look different on tax bills based on those formulas. I can get pretty detailed on this, I think, if you have questions on how it works out in different areas. But I put a couple of highlights here. Well, highlights depending on where you live, I guess. But let me just see where I wrote it down. Okay, let me back up. The equalization rates in the following towns decreased slightly. Those were Hague, Lake Luzerne, Stony Creek, Thurman, and Warrensburg. The valuations in Bolton and Lake George both went up. That added, between those two towns, added $586 million in assessed value to the county. Queensbury also went up appreciably. Queensbury added $37 million to the entire county valuation. Others went up or down by lower amounts. The percentage share of the county tax levy would go up in Chester. Hang on, let me make sure I get this right. Okay, the percentage share in the county tax levy goes up in Bolton and Lake George. It goes down in Chester, Glens Falls, Horicon, Johnsburg, and Queensbury. And it stays about the same in Hague, Lake Luzerne, Stony Creek, Thurman, and Warrensburg. That's proportional. That's the percentage of the county tax levy burden that's paid in each of these towns. If you want to talk about pure dollars, the dollars levied by the county in the town of Bolton go up by $470,000. In Lake George, they go up by $432,000. In Queensbury, they go down by $110,000. And everybody else stays within $50,000 of where they are at this year. There's other tools that we have in our arsenal for next year as we continue to go through the year. We can look at departmental mergers. We had a lot of conversations about that earlier this year. We could look at pension amortization. It's nothing that I'm crazy about. I know the treasurer is not crazy about it either, but it's an option that's always out there if we ever needed it in a dire circumstance. We can look at an early retirement incentive, and we can look at sale of county property. And you know, we're lucky. We're in a good position here. This budget's tough, but it's not as tough as some other counties are looking at. And we do have options on the horizon for the future. That's all I had ready to go. So if anybody's got questions or concerns or feedback, and we'll meet again to talk about adjustments to the tentative after it's filed. Yes, sir, Brad.
What time did you finish this morning?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Actually, I finished before midnight. I wasn't up all night.
Well, Brian, thank you. We talked yesterday, and not that you showed any nervousness, you showed good control, and but that was a lot of presentation today, especially with the shortcomings of Kevin not being here, unfortunately. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Kevin, Kevin would have covered all of this stuff, and it was in his head. It was in my head, but it's sometimes to get the details down on paper, it just takes a bit. But you know, I think we're in a good spot. Matt Simpson had a question.
I just had a comment. I'm thankful that those towns that grew. That's good for Horton.
Supervisor Thomas.
How much money are we looking to borrow?
It depends on whether or not we're able to do the 2 years. But it would be, the idea is to do, if we can, to do $9.8 million worth of work in 1 year. And we do have a cash appropriation towards 3.25 of that. The idea would be that in the 2022 budget, we do the same thing, somewhere between a $3 and a $3.5 million appropriation. So there's $7 million of it. Claudia?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I have some other questions, but since we're on the road thing, I wanted to ask, I have the $3 million in my head from Kevin that he wanted last year. How much did we allocate for 2020?
$3 million.
That's what he,
Yeah.
so he must have wanted more than 3 million, because I remember we didn't give him everything he wanted.
What we've done the past 2 years is we budgeted $3 million, and we say, let's take a look at how the sales tax comes in, and we'll appropriate more if we can afford to do it. We did that. So end of 2018, we did that. And then in early 2019, we added something like $1 million to it. I don't recall. Frank probably remembers better than me.
Okay, so we're bumping up from 3 million to 4.9 million for next year.
Right.
Taking
But
and then we're bonding for an additional, whatever it is you said we're doing in 2021, another 7 million. I'm sorry, 3 million to get us to 7 million total for next year.
No, you got to think about it in terms of cash appropriation. So the cash appropriation into this year was 3 million, and we did not, even though we did better in sales tax last year, we had that money to invest in the road program. We didn't do it because of COVID. We left it at the $3 million cash appropriation. The cash appropriation for next year is 3.25 million. So that's the comparison. It's 3 versus 3.25. If we end up doing more work than 3.25 million, some of that work is going to be on borrowed money.
Didn't you just say you're shooting for $9 million worth of work next year?
Yes. If we can do 2 years worth of paving in 1 year, it would represent $9.8 million. Or 8 point, what is it? Is my math off? 9.8, yeah. Yeah, 4.9 plus 4.9 is 9.8.
Can I ask another one?
Sure.
Thanks for the bottom line. I was waiting for that because I didn't think I had heard it at the beginning about what the tax levy increase is going to be. And I appreciate the reduction in the county tax rate. I don't have the numbers in front of me. What did we do last year? The number was pretty good last year.
Yeah, last year we added about something in the 700,000s. Yeah.
What did that do to our county tax rate though? Do you remember?
Oh, the rate stayed the same.
It stayed flat.
Yeah, the rate was
Okay.
exactly flat. But the levy went up by something in the
Right.
700s. That's what I thought you were asking.
I was kind of asking that too. And we're doing this year, it's gonna be, what is it?
The increase this
45
year,
and a half to
It-
46 and something.
this year is 45,357. Next year it'd be 46,147. Do that quickly. Anybody got
So
it?
that's roughly the same
Yeah.
as, okay.
Yep.
Okay. That's almost seems too good to be true, doesn't it?
It does, and it's true because of the revals. Thank you, Bolton and Lake George.
Selling a lot of property over COVID summer.
Yeah.
I do have one more question. In the revenue worksheet, that's just these 2 pages at the beginning.
Yes.
I see what I think are fairly large increases in a couple of the departments, county clerk and in the sheriff's. Why is Kevin doing that?
The county clerk is reflective of mortgage tax. I think that's the biggest one in there, and the initial projection is very conservative, but we've seen the real estate market being strong, so that's why that's in there.
Okay, how about that other one, county clerk fees, that goes with it?
County clerk fees.
I mean, we're still not even open for regular people to walk in the door.
But Rob, do you recall off the top of your head where that one is trending for this year? I think that one is going to be okay this year, but I'd have to pull out the report. It's trending above budget, yeah.
Okay. So Pam likely was just being overly conservative there with
Correct.
her initial, okay.
Yeah.
And then what about in the sheriff's fee, that top one, the 45,000 added revenue?
That represents, bear with me while I pull my budget out. $33.10. $120,000 is where that account has been budgeted for the past several years. So we restored it to that. The $75,000 we didn't think was warranted. In 2019, they made $123,000. And in 2020, they're on track to make up the 120 as well. I think when the sheriff made that budget, I don't want to speak to how they did it, but it looks like what they did is just took what they had received year to date, divided it by the amount of months that had already passed, and then multiplied it by 12. But this is an account that doesn't come in steadily throughout the year, so you can't do that.
Oh, okay. And then does that, didn't we authorize them to do the fingerprinting thing or no?
This wouldn't be related to fingerprinting. It would just be a status quo thing. We think 120 is a solid number and that there was no reason to reduce it in the budget request.
Okay. Okay, I do have one more question. You said about no COLA increases. Does that mean none of our employees are getting an increase in salary whatsoever?
They get anything that's included in the contract, which means if they pass a certain increment, like if you're in CSEA and you go from your 15th year to your 20th year, you get whatever longevity you're entitled to. But there's no, so you have that grid where it lists your grade like this, and then your amount of years like this, and it matches up with a salary. Cost of living adjustment is like the 2% that would be applied to the entire grid.
On top of that.
Yeah, so there's no application like
And
that.
we're not doing anything for our non-union employees that aren't subject to that.
Correct. Yeah, status quo.
And we're not doing anything for supervisors.
I don't think so. This budget certainly doesn't have that in there, but that's usually that's got to be a local law that the board passes. So we're not recommending it at this point, no. You could if you wanted to.
I don't think so.
That's one that I'm never going to say no to. Supervisor Sieber, I think, had a comment.
Thank you, Ryan. I do. Thank you very much for getting back to me last night regarding the questions that I had about the budget and the process. And I appreciate the opportunity that we'll be able to meet again and make any suggestions and amendments after the budget is presented. So this update's very helpful. And I know you've worked really hard on it with Kevin, and that's much appreciated. My question is as it relates to the contract line. I was wondering if you could send out a list of the contracts and also the dollar amount, what that goes towards for all of the contracts. I'm somewhat concerned, and I hope that our committee takes an opportunity to look at the contract line. And, we're asking all our other departments to try to find ways to save money and cut funds. And I'm just hopeful that we're going to look at that and maybe decide that a flat rate isn't where it should stay. Maybe we should take a deeper look at some of those contracts and to see also what benefit it's providing to the county taxpayer. I know in some of these contracts, the local municipalities are also contributing to those entities. And I'm not saying they don't go towards different things. I'm saying I don't know. And in the past, we've been able to see a list of those contracts, sometimes their budgets. We've had some presentations by some of those groups. We've asked for after action reports to find out how that money is used. So that's just one area I was hoping to get a little more information on and clarity, if that would be okay.
For which department?
For the contract line.
I think
At the beginning of the meeting, you
outside
went through.
organizations that you
Pardon?
listed off, like the Lake George Regional Planning Board, ANCA, Lakes to Locks. Is that what you're talking about, Supervisor?
It is. Yep, you have a whole contract line out of Amanda's, I think it
Oh,
falls.
yeah. Sure. We can get that to you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bramer.
In that vein, are there contracts out there that we're keeping flat that maybe we should be asking the outside consulting firms or whatever they are to reduce for next year? Have we looked at that deeply within each of the departments? I mean, I'm thinking we've got gobs of contracts with outside vendors.
Well, what we've done is if we've had a contractor that comes in for next year looking for an increase, we push really hard on them not to do an increase. Because these people are all feeling pressure too, and they're losing money left and right.
That's true. Most of those that we're renewing the contracts are we're either in a contract that we can't just change on them in the middle.
Right.
Or if they're coming back to renew, we're asking them to hold flat or
Right. A lot of the time we're our vendors are businesses that are in our community.
Oh, that brings up another point. When you said about the paving and, getting our local people to work, I think we really need to be careful that we do hire someone local when we go out for that work. We've had people bidding on our projects that are from Rochester or farther, and they're not local. They're not even hiring local people. So I don't know how we can put that in. I don't know if that's legal, but we need to be careful that we try to do that. Actually hire local.
Sorry, Doug, I didn't see you waving.
Thanks, Ryan. Keeping contracts flat is something that I'm concerned about. Let me give you an example. The EDC, we give over $300,000 a year to. They've got over $1 million in cash that they haven't spent. And to be very frank with you, I think we should be looking at decreasing their funding and possibly using some of that decrease to go to our planning department for a couple reasons. Number one is we can control it better. Number two is I think we get a better bang for our buck. So, we constantly give the EDC $300,000 like it's automatic. Although one year we did push back and cut them a little bit, but they keep building up more and more and more and more in their reserve. We keep funding them. Queensbury gives them $100,000. Glens Falls gives them $50,000. And I don't really see the bang for the buck out of the EDC yet. And now they're talking, well, let's hire 4 or 5 more people. Well, that's basically Warren County is hiring 4 or 5 more people. And I'm not sure that's even productive or good ROI. So I'd like us to take a real hard look at the EDC about possibly cutting them back $50,000 to $100,000 this year. Again, they've got over $1 million right now in reserve. And to me, it doesn't make economic sense to be maintaining that funding level for this year. So let's take a look at that. Thanks, Ryan.
I haven't been paying close attention to remote people. Anybody else that I missed remotely?
Ryan, it's Mike Wild.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, I just have to make a comment about the EDC. Doug and Mr. Beatty, I'm not sure if he was part of the discussion that Jim Siplon has given. Jim is running the EDC now. His plans are to move forward as fast as we can. There's businesses relocating out of metropolitan areas. There's opportunities for us to grow. There's opportunities for us to help local businesses that want to expand. There's a number of them. So I think as we go forward, we have to think about what our role is. Is our role is just to maintain and cut back, or is our role to help this county move forward? So I'm a staunch supporter of what the EDC is trying to do. There's a new leadership, there's new direction, and I don't mind taking a look at it, but I think we need to give them a little bit of time to look for results and then see the results and then make a turn on that. Thank you, Brian.
Supervisor Stroud?
Yes, thank you. I think if Supervisor Beatty had a discussion with some members of the EDC, of which I am one, and I'm on the board, I think he would find out that the plans for economic development in Warren County are going to be a lot more aggressive, and they are going to need the funding going forward. There's a lot of components to this. I'm not about to go into those at this time, but I would suggest that Mr. Beatty do his homework first.
Thanks, Mr. Stroud. I've done more than my homework, but thanks anyway. When you're sitting on $1 million, over $1 million in cash, and you haven't spent it, and you keep adding to it and adding to it with minimal results, us keeping our funding level at 300,000 plus doesn't really make a lot of sense from a business standpoint. Now, going after businesses down south, actually the 2030 task force came up with that about a year and a half ago. So that's actually a good idea. They're building off of our idea. So, at the end of the day, here we are asking all our departments to cut back and so forth. And we've got the EDC sitting on over $1 million in cash. We're funding it at the same level as we have in the past. So they keep growing their reserve bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're not seeing really a good rate on ROI on that. So thanks, Mr. Stroud, for your input. It's duly noted.
Ryan, if I may.
Sure.
Mr. Beatty, I think your homework may have missed a couple of things. The EDC is spending down their reserve in addition to the $350,000 that we give them significantly. And I don't know the exact number, but their plan is to spend down their reserve because their plans are to spend more money that they're getting from the county and the towns in the city. So maybe you need to dig into it a little bit more. I'm sure that Mr. Siplon's comments from one of the EDC meetings, not the EDC, but the Economic Growth and Committee are online, and you can hear from him exactly what his plans were in terms of spending down the reserves.
Well, he's adding more people. Yeah, you can spend down reserves by adding more staff. That doesn't mean you're becoming more effective or more productive. But
I just have to say that Mike Wild knows a whole lot more about what he's talking about. He seems to understand the situation better.
Supervisor Diamond's got his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to address some of those comments that were made. First of all, I have to agree with Mr. Beatty that
maybe we need to look at our appropriation towards EDC. I know it was 2019 where we decided not to fund the EDC by $50,000, and we retained our local development corporation management in-house. I don't know why in 2020 we changed and permitted or contracted with them to do the local development corporation. The city of Glens Falls has and always will continue to manage through their local development corporation their revolving loan. So we don't pay anybody really to do that. But I want to point out, I've looked at some of the numbers recently, and the proposed budget that was adopted by EDC for 2020, and I don't know what their actuals are at this point in time. They're going to have a spending deficit of 171,662, and they forecasted over the next 3 years deficit spending. That concerns me. What they do have in actual reserves, what I found out was they have approximately, and let me get my notes here, operating reserve cash of 242,000. They have property carries over in cash of $110,000. They've got monies appropriated in the special projects fund for $137,000 to the town of Queensbury, and they've got monies appropriated to $50,000 to the regional loan fund. That gives committed cash, committed monies of $539,869 that are committed to those projects. Those monies cannot be transferred out unless it's through a board resolution. So to say that they've got over $1 million in cash reserves, they've got $539,000 or $540,000 that they can't transfer without a board resolution. So I don't think they're cash heavy. Matter of fact, I look at their forecast, and if they don't change the forecast, they'll be out of business unless they get more money coming in. I look at, and maybe one way to get more revenue coming into the EDC is to get their membership to fund more monies on an annual basis. That's kind of where I'm at. I was looking at this a little bit. And it is kind of alarming in that sense that anytime you have a spending deficit, it's a concern to me.
So Supervisor Conover and Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. I just want to quickly say, I think the strategy on the road reconstruction is right on the money. No pun intended. I traveled one of the roads that needs reconstruction yesterday, and I can tell you that it is in deplorable condition to the extent where I'm not sure that the town of Bolton going forward is even interested in trying to plow it. It represents too much wear and tear on our equipment. And frankly, we can't clear the snow and the ice properly on it. We have to use way too much salt, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the whole strategy right now with interest rates being as low as they are, of trying to get, I won't say caught up, but try to get at least somewhere in terms of the road reconstruction is a very important thing to do. And that you're proposing it within this budget, all I can say is kudos to the planners. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Conover. On that point, just to add some detail to it that I neglected to mention earlier, the 4.9 million for next year that was in the request, that would be for 35.5 miles of road. They grade these roads. They give them numerical grades, and the lower the grade gets, the more expensive it is to fix. That 35.5 miles would be for one number 8. It would be for 11 7s. It would be for 5 6s and 3 5s. 5s are complete reconstructions. They're very expensive. So the idea in keeping up with this is to not have to do the 6s and the 5s anymore and to focus your paving each year on the 8s and the 7s. But you can't do that without an upfront investment of cash that we just don't have. Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. As Supervisor Conover just spoke, it reminded me that we've been incredibly cautious with all of our projections going into next year. We've cut occupancy tax. We've cut almost every single department some money somewhere. And so in that discussion that we're talking about EDC and LDC and then our contracts, it does raise my awareness, and I'm sure it does everyone else's, about those contracts that we continue to enter into. I'm not sure, to Supervisor Bramer's point, if they're all existing contracts that we can't adjust moving into next year. Certainly, we've shown a pattern of behavior here on the board that even with a contract, we're coming back and we're cutting some funds. So I don't think that it's unreasonable to look at those, to take that into consideration. But Supervisor Diamond clearly has more information than I've been able to get from EDC. I have, in fact, reached out to them a couple of times, and Jim has been great with getting back to me. But the one document that I'm missing is what that budget looks like for them next year, which it's my understanding their board has not yet passed. So I think Jack had a preview at that, is what it sounds like. But regardless, what I would love to be able to see, and we've asked for it since last month at Mike Wild's EDC meeting, is that they come in and they talk about their budget. I think we'll all recall that Ed did that. He did it very well in communicating with our board. And of course, we've got to give some time for them to get up to speed after, of course, the tragic loss of losing Ed. So I think that it would be appropriate to hear from them. I hope they decide to come in and talk before we have to vote on this full budget. But that is a big chunk of change to our county, especially given those reserves. But again, with every single contract that we're giving money to, I hope that this board decides to implement a practice of those after action reports, the way that we do when we spend occupancy tax money, or with the Civic Center is a good example today, who came and spoke to us. They submit financials annually, but they also give updates. So I think it would be nice if consistency, was across the board with all of those contracts that we're asking the taxpayers to provide any type of funding to whatsoever. And I'll look forward to that list. But Ryan, I just want to make sure that list tells me what is that money going for, not just a dollar amount, because I think it's important that we make sure, just like with OCTAX and other funding streams, that it's not an area where we're all contributing to the same efforts, and that we do get our bang for our buck, and that the taxpayer investment is protected. So I appreciate all the comments about EDC and LDC, but I think it's a bigger issue to that whole contract line. And again, I appreciate the attention and a review of that.
Any other questions, comments? Supervisor Bramer?
Thanks. I guess on Supervisor Seaver's comment, I would ask that our county attorney look at our contracts and see if there's room for us to reduce any of those, even though we're in the middle of
I'm starting to lose track of what the objective is here. What is the request? Are we looking for a list of what all these outside entity contracts are that I named earlier, or are we looking? What else are we looking for? I want to make sure we're responding to the request here.
I can only speak to myself, Ryan. I'm looking for a list of the contracts, the amount of money that we give. I think Claudia is asking for what status are we in? Is it an annual contract? Is it something we can reduce? And it sounds like it's more of a legal question. But I'd like to know who we're giving money to and for what purpose and how much.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Back to the chair.
Do you have any other business that needs to come before the committee? All right, we have no referrals. Do you have privilege of the floor, Mr. Lehman? Do we have anything on YouTube?
No, Chairwoman Frazier, there's nothing on YouTube as of right now.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Supervisor Simpson, second by Supervisor Diamond. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? I hope not. Thank you.
All those letters.